Okay, let's get it started. Like I said, my name is Dan Houts. I'm marketing manager here at OutMatch. Um, we've got some exciting things going on here at OutMatch, and we want to share with you what our vision of 2016 will be like and what hiring resolutions you should take into account when you can drive success in hiring this coming year. A couple of housekeeping items to update you with. If you would like to ask us a question and not through the GoToWebinar platform, which you're certainly more than welcome to, you can go to Twitter and tweet us at OutMatchHCM with the hashtag hiring resolutions. We'll monitor that and we'll make sure we get as many questions as we possibly can at the end of the presentation addressed. So moving forward here, we'll hop right into it, and I promise we're not going to have, and I want to say hi to our current clients that are on as well, but I promise that we're not going to have a commercial here about what OutMatch is. We do want to address hiring challenges and how to resolve them, but real quick, you should know that recently we've merged two companies, Assess Systems and Check.com. Last August, we started this large merger of these two excellent assessment companies to make one much larger, better company called OutMatch. You can get us at OutMatch.com, and that's where I'll leave all of that. Today, we're talking with George Enger, our VP of Account Management at OutMatch. I work very closely with George. We've been together for a few years now, and he's got excellent insight on all of these topics. So I'd like to introduce George. If you'd like to say hi, if you have anything you want to say about yourself, now's the time to do it.
Hi, thanks, Dan. No, just looking forward to getting into the presentation. I will say I have a new resolution for the year, which is to have the word brilliant used to describe me more frequently. You did that. It is the first time in the fall ever having that same sentence. So thanks very much.
You're very welcome. I'm glad that I could start off your new year with that resolution. Let's take a poll real quick about hiring challenges. You'll have 4 choices. Select one. Let us know what's happening in your landscape right now. So on your screen, you should see the poll question. We'll give about 25 seconds to answer it, and George and I will take a look at the results, and we'll go from there. Okay, a few more seconds to answer. And we'll close it. All right, let's share these results with everybody. Hopefully you can see them. You should be able to see them now. George, what do you think about that? It looks like spread across the board, but there's
a little bit.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So turnover is too high. That's kind of a really emerging trend with a lot of our clients. As the economy has picked up, people have gotten a little bit pickier about the positions that they're in and have been more willing to take a risk and go to other companies. So that's certainly a common theme. But it's funny, isn't it, that you've got too many candidates in the same as the number 2. So there's a lot of applicants, and yet people are turning over. So that could be a sign that there's some selection process breakdown. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Associating too many candidates with too little time, and then a few people are having a problem with candidate drop-off rates, which would tell us that there's a little bit of a candidate experience issue, and what can be done to alleviate that, and we'll get into that in a bit. Let's see if I can get everybody a view of the screen again. There we go. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Every organization has its own hiring challenges. Especially in the highest rate of candidate-driven market that we've seen in the last 15 years, there are much more job openings now, much more candidates. So let's move forward. George, why don't you take us through and tell us a little bit about these common hiring challenges, and then we'll get into 3 different ways you can alleviate them.
Yeah, sure. I think what's interesting is anytime you've got like a fast-paced company, high-volume hiring, it runs a toll on an organization. And I know in our organization here, which is only 100 employees, the time it takes to hire is an immensely draining process. And it takes a long time, it sucks up a lot of resources, and ultimately there's a lot of costs that go with it. So getting that right is really critical. Um, it's important that as we're trying to get it right, that we don't get completely hung up on our own processes, on our own experience, and focus instead on the candidate experience. So it's amazing to me when you look. It's interesting, I just relocated here to Dallas, and my wife was applying to a position online, and she had an absolutely terrible experience with the ATS, where she typed some incorrect info and had to hit the page back button, and it took out everything that she'd done for the 15 minutes of filling out the application. It's incredible to think that some really simple things aren't always thought of, but that bad candidate experience is absolutely critical. Reference checking, kind of a thing of the past, but we certainly have some antidotes to that here at OutMatch. And then turnover, which was already cited by all our attendees here, as the number one issue that companies are facing today. So as much effort as we're going to put into that front end of the hiring process, companies really need to make sure that they're focusing on a quality outcome, because if they don't, they're just going to be on a treadmill or revolving door, as it says there, towards trying to always be sourcing and hiring people.
Beautiful. So let's talk about resolution number one. And eventually it'll change screens for you. So resolution number one says, I will leverage job fit data to predict candidate success. George, what does that mean?
Well, so what we're really getting at there is identifying, I think the first thing is, and the graphic that you've got there is very interesting. It's a piece of puzzle, a series of puzzle pieces. You have to identify what is the hole that you're trying to fill. So it's really critical to establish early up front the appropriate characteristics that you're trying to look for, the levels of experience that you're looking for, behavioral traits, if you can measure them, and skills traits. So it's really critical to, if you're going to believe in this resolution, to identify early on what is the profile of the perfect hire. You can't really hire a great person if you don't know what a great person looks like. But that can take a lot of effort early on in measuring it. And when we're talking about job fit data, what we're typically doing is measuring the incumbents in the role or doing some type of measurement of the organization so that we can assure that the individuals that are succeeding today, we can then replicate them in the future. And the interesting thing is, actually, I heard a great thing on the radio coming into work the other day about Intel, who has got a diversity effort underway. And a lot of organizations have placed an emphasis on diversity, but at the end of the day, while trying to identify the diverse population, what managers were doing was still trying to hire people in their own image. So even though that maybe Intel wanted to focus on more female employees or more minority employees, the hiring managers were still hell-bent on having them be from Ivy League schools or from certain geographies or play sports or whatever it may be.
Right.
All these kind of underlying biases. Well, the real truth to the matter is that if you can establish from the beginning a good set of data against which you can predict success, then you're going to be much more likely to find the appropriate candidates who aren't necessarily the ones with the best resume or the ones with the best school, It's the ones with the best potential for success, because in our fast-moving economy, um, let's face it, the skills that you have today are not going to be the skills that make you succeed tomorrow. So the question isn't just what are the things that are on your resume or in your past, but how quickly an individual can learn or adapt or whatever it may be. And these things are much harder for managers to wrap their heads around, but if you provide the correct tools, they're not all that hard for HR to provide. And they typically are provided in the way of behavioral assessments, um, personality fit, skills testing, and things along those lines.
So these job profiles that we're hoping companies can create, so they actually have some data to support their hiring decisions, go much deeper than just looking at resume and experience and what education they have. It's actually something that's much more meaningful than that, specific to the job. Is that what you're saying?
That is exactly right. Yes, you want to look at the data points that your most successful incumbents have and apply those to the front end, to the application process, to the hiring process and selection process.
So that's great. So I was always going to compare this to our original problems: candidate experience lacking, speed to hire or time to hire, and that's probably the buzz term, and a reduction in turnover. Will this help alleviate any of those challenges?
Well, there's no question it helps in speed to hire, because you're making decisions based on data more so than gut feel. And so you can really move people through a process much faster. Your candidate experience, I'll go back to my wife's experience with the UPS. So she was shocked. It was for a pretty senior sales job in an advertising firm, and the only thing that they asked about educationally was high school experience. It was a really bad candidate experience for her. Was it that the company has made a mistake in the way that they're asking people for information, or was the job way lower level than what she thought it was from the ad?
Right.
She couldn't tell, but it was a frustrating experience. Well, if you really know what you're looking for, then you're going to be asking appropriate questions all the way through the hiring process, and candidates will figure that out, and they'll understand, and they will appreciate your recruitment brand more.
That's excellent. So this is a great segue into our next resolution, because once you've got these ideal profiles, resolution number 2 is I'll be an ideal matchmaker. And that's where those puzzle pieces, that's when you start to put them together. And being an ideal matchmaker, what does that mean to you, George?
So this obviously, has to do with initially setting up what's that appropriate benchmark, or what's that appropriate thing that I'm trying to measure, and then putting in place all the appropriate tools that you can so your hiring managers can make that ideal fit. So what we're talking about now is things like interviewing with structure and developing interview processes that create feedback and strong data loops back to the job competencies that you're trying to match to. So it's one thing to say, okay, here's this great profile of the perfect hire and put it up on a shelf. It's another thing to take that profile and now start to implement it at every stage of the hiring process. And I will say, I think the 2 areas that are very tough to get data and structure around, that we've actually done a lot of work. You did make me promise that wouldn't be a commercial, so I'm not trying to suggest it. But I think that there's a lot of things going on in this space where incremental amounts of data are being used to compare cultural fit and to use interview feedback and apply data to that in interview feedback. So without getting into too much detail, what I mean by that is, using an interview as an example, how many times have we put someone through a 3 or 4 person interview process, and at the end of the day, the feedback from those interviews is some water cooler discussion. Yeah, they were pretty good. Oh, seemed inexperienced. Oh, I really liked her. Whatever it may be. No data or structure whatsoever to that, as opposed to having a hiring manager complete a a very brief survey that asks them to specifically give feedback around the specific competencies or success measures that you already identified in that front end. So now all of a sudden what you're doing is not just saying look for these things in the interview process, you're asking that hiring manager, did you see these things in the interview process?
Right.
And to what degree? And all of a sudden you now have a scoreable number that you can apply to that individual, and all of a sudden a lot of that bias, like what school they went to, or how they're associated with me, or what sports they're interested that I may be interested in too, kind of start to fly out the window, and what you get to is the true match to a successful candidate that's already an incumbent.
That's great. So now we're not just utilizing at the front end of the hiring process. Now we're utilizing these profiles and moving them throughout the process so it all matches.
Exactly.
That's fantastic. What kind of problem are we solving by doing this? Is it well, I guess I'll instead of giving you suggestions, I'll let you answer the question.
I think to me it should really drive towards that turnover problem, right? Because you're going to be hiring people that are really right for the position. There's two broad types of turnover: voluntary and involuntary. One of them has to do with, in my mind, hiring someone that's not really good for the job, i.e. not capable of doing it. And the other one oftentimes is hiring somebody that's too good for the job, and they move on and leave voluntarily because they weren't challenged. So hiring really does require being a good matchmaker, and reducing turnover means that you're hiring people that are appropriate for the job and that are going to grow and be successful like your other successful incumbents.
Right. Those that are going to be in that seat every single day and want to be there, whether it's a Monday morning or a Friday afternoon.
That's right. That's right. As our executive chairman says, if you hire well, you're going to make Mondays suck less for everybody.
Right. Right. I like to be more positive about it and say make Mondays great. That's one.
I just heard it my way.
Yeah. That is what was said. While we digress, we'll move over to resolution number 3, which is I'll actually check references and not simply go through the motions. It seems like if you are checking references, it's a part of the checklist to get the hire in the door. And for the most part, I'm finding that more and more organizations are simply not checking references. So, George, why don't you take us through what this means? Why we need to be checking references and not just checking the box, but actually learning about the candidate.
Yep. So this is a really interesting one. You're absolutely right that over the last several decades, reference checking has kind of gone by the wayside for a handful of reasons. People are fearful that they can't give information. Companies have instituted policies against providing references and things along those lines. And all those are really, I think, almost more manufactured in individuals' mind, because at the end of the day, we're all looking for an excuse to not put a very labor-intensive process into the last step of that hiring decision, right?
Right.
So there's a whole bunch of reasons why it's kind of gone by the wayside. But the scary thing is that no matter what you do in all those other processes that I described, a great upfront assessment, a really good structured interview process, identifying the ideal candidate or the ideal hiring profile, no matter what you do, you cannot get as good of information pre-hire about an individual as you can from people that have worked with that individual before. It is the number one most telling source of data. There are, phenomenal narcissists and psychopaths that can get through an interview and assessment process no problem.
Yeah.
And you hire them and they leave.
Right.
Or other people leave because they're suddenly on the team with a narcissist and a psychopath. On the flip side, there are these humble overachievers who don't do a great job describing how powerfully they work. But you get a hold of the past employers of either one of those two individuals at both ends of the spectrum, one of whom you wouldn't have maybe gotten through your process appropriately, or you would have gotten through it in a very gentle way. The other one would have flown through the process as a boastful, great interviewer. And you get the past employers of those two candidates on the phone, and that humble overachiever will have a flying reference. It will be wonderful. And that narcissistic, very difficult to get along with person who's a braggadocio, that person is not going to get a great reference. Now, we still have the question of, okay, George, that's why you would want to check references. I get it. Well, don't do it on the phone, that's for sure. If you really want to take this resolution seriously, automate the reference checking process. It's a very simple thing to do, and a good scientifically based automated reference checking tool will allow you to query past employers with very specific scoring ranges against competencies that are job relevant. So you're not getting the soft and fuzzy, oh, she was a great girl and loved her because she brought the donuts on Friday type reference. You're getting a true competency-based, I could rely on her in the crunch, she did well under pressure, she showed up to work every day. Those type of things, measured on a scale of 1 to 5 for multiple references, you get a data-driven report about that individual that is really second to none in terms of its predictability towards future performance.
That's perfect. Well, you know what else? If you're doing these other, if you're implementing these other resolutions or making that perfect match and it meets your culture and you do enjoy donuts on a Friday morning, well, that person will probably do that anyway.
That's a good point.
The reference doesn't necessarily have to tell you about it. This, of course, will help with turnover. Does it help with speed to hire at all?
It actually does, because any smart company would require some level of reference checking. And if you're doing a phone-based reference check, you obviously wait to the very, very end of that hiring process because it's time-consuming on you. But if you do an automated reference check, two things can happen. One, you can actually do reference checks on finalists because it's so much less time intensive for the hiring organization. So you actually have the reference check going into your final interview, and certainly before you make the offer. And number two, an automated reference check typically is turned around in 24 hours, whereas a phone-based reference check, as we know, might take a week or 10 days, even longer if the individual's past employers are traveling or on vacation or something like that. But with an automated reference check, you can get a result even in those circumstances because the reference provider can do it off a smartphone and only takes a couple minutes. So yes, you can get to yes and get to that offer stage much faster with automated reference checking, and you can do it with a much greater degree of confidence.
I have to imagine, I've actually gone through an automated reference check process, and my experience with it was very excellent. It was a seamless process. I put in probably 3 to 5 of my past supervisors, and an email went off, and I didn't have to find their phone number. I didn't have to find their address and stuff like that on these forms that you have to fill out to make references known to the prospective employer that you're looking at. So candidate experience is also has got to be improved by doing this new air quotes new way of reference checking.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And the reference providers widely prefer to fill out an online survey versus talking to an individual. That we know.
Absolutely. So let's do this. Let's close up here. We're about 4 minutes left, and we're going to do one more poll before we get to a couple of questions. So I'm going to launch the poll real quick, and what we'd like to know is, after what you've heard, which one of these would you seriously, want to implement in 2016? Votes are coming in. We'll do about 10 more seconds here.
And the smart money says that being an ideal matchmaker is what they're going to try to be.
Well, that's the smart money. I'm not going to give away anything. I can see the poll moving. We got about 75% in. I'll wait another 5 seconds to get everybody's vote in.
Boy, after that big plug for reference checking, if it doesn't come out first, I'll be upset. But
everybody should keep in mind that there are a lot of ways that you can automate the process, even if you just created your own little survey monkey to roll it out. Okay, I'm going to close it, and we'll share the results. And George, the smart money is to be an ideal matchmaker, and there you go. Half.
That's cool. That's great. But look at that, 29% said references. So I'm happy to see that, because it really has changed the hiring process here at OutMatch, and it has for a lot of our clients too. And it's certainly something that everybody should investigate.
Yeah, this gives us good insight into what's going on out there. Okay, let's field a question or two. We got 2 minutes. Let's see here. Well, here's a good one, and it's probably the only one that we might get to with the time it would take to answer it. George, where would you start? How would you even start? To be a matchmaker, to be to implement any one of these.
Wow. Yeah, that's the whole presentation, isn't it? If I had to start anywhere, and calling OutMatch is not an allowed answer?
It's not.
I think the number one thing that people need to do, if I was going to improve my hiring process, I would go through your hiring process as a candidate. Go ahead and apply and see what it looks like and feels like, and see where any possible breakdowns are happening from that candidate experience and that selection process that you could easily fix. Because looking at your process as an outsider is probably the number one place that you're going to find a way to improve that hiring process.
That's a great answer from the brilliant George Enger. We'll end it at that. Thank everybody for joining us, for participating in the polls. Our next webinar will be March 3rd. We'll talk about making better hiring decisions by using assessments. And I promise there won't be another plug for OutMatch. But you can get us at outmatch.com, and certainly try to sign up for a newsletter to get any kind of content that we push